Hello, fellow fantasy sports fans. Welcome to MFSN, the Hub's waiver wire show for baseball every Thursday at 4:45 p.m. Eastern, 1:45 p.m. Pacific. I am here as always with Casey, Vlad to the Bone, Scheinvold.
How are you, Dan?
I'm doing well. It's good to see you. Now, those of you who are big Ross the Boss fans may notice he's out. Those of you who are not big Ross the Boss fans, we don't know what's wrong with you, but he's out anyway. And in any case, he is recovering from COVID. The rumors are true, but he's now doing better. So we should see him next week. We'll look forward to that. In the meantime, we have begun releasing shorts leading up to the waiver wire. Today, we released my number one pickup. Jeremy Pena, the shortstop of the Houston Astros, young hitter, and he is contributing at a very high level. I think he ranks like 54th in Yahoo overall. He's putting up some really good numbers. We'll take a look at his numbers specifically, but just as a reminder, everybody, we're looking at Yahoo 60% rostership and below. So if it's somebody above that and we don't mention him, now you know why. So, Casey, we're going to go through our top four pickups. I already said one of mine, and we compared notes a little bit beforehand. For whatever reason, my top four pickups, I felt the top priority pickups were all hitters. Now, as always, keep in mind for your own team, you got to think what you need. If you're loaded in hitting and you need pitchers, pay attention to who we say in pitchers. Find the categories that work for you. Jeremy Pena is a guy, though, that I have at the top of my list, and it's partly because I think that he can keep doing what he's doing. A lot of times you see guys, and they're hitting really well, but the question is, can they keep doing what they're doing? Well, Pena, he's a pretty high prospect, but the thing is, he's not going to lose playing time. He's really set there. When they let Carlos Correa go, it was very clear that they were going to let him have the keys to the castle there. Now, if he had started off really, really slowly, would I be a bit worried? Possibly, but now I think he's really solidified himself there. He hits for some power. He has 2 home runs so far. No stolen bases, but really, does anybody steal bases anymore? I wish they did, but it doesn't seem like it's happening very much. Here are my other pickups, and these hitter pickups, I should say, Casey, they're kind of off the beaten path in a way. Seth Beer is another one. Now, why is he off the beaten path? Because he's a utility player. And a lot of people get really frustrated about that. In fact, if Ross were here, he'd be going bananas right now. He hates utility players. He just wants everybody to have position eligibility. Except Shohei Ohtani. That's true. But even him, I think Ross would be a bit more down on than most. So the thing about Seth Beer, though, is he did start at first base. Is it the start of something special? I sure hope so. Because if it is, and he qualifies at first base, the guy really can hit. Doesn't matter if he can't field as long as he gets position eligibility at first base. Another guy that I see really heating up, this is a young prospect, did not hit well last year, but he's showing more than signs of life. He's looking pretty good, and that's Alec Baum of the Philadelphia Phillies. I think that he really has arrived as a true hitter. He's going to have his ups and downs, but I think he's going to be in that lineup more often than not, increasingly so. I think this is the time to pounce on him. One of the reasons that I'm prioritizing these young players is they're lesser known, and if they take off, they could be this good the whole year. They're not like journeyman, players that are just starting off hot. We don't know. They could really take off. Here's another guy. He's not even in the majors yet. Nolan Gorman. Now, Nolan Gorman, he plays on a team that has Nolan Arenado at third base, which has led some people to call him Nolan Gormanado. I don't know if you've heard that nickname, but I love it. Pick up Nolan Gormanado, and here's why. First of all, he's absolutely tearing it up in the minor leagues. He had 7 home runs in 7 days. I think five games in a row where he homered once. And he's just tearing the cover off the ball. But the best thing about him, in terms of how he's going to help you, he's currently third base eligible, but he's going to come up as a second baseman. So that means he's covering 2 of the weaker positions, actually. Really big help, and that's why I'd pounce on him before some of the other guys who you might be able to get later floating around. Okay, that was a long rant of all my guys. Who are your top 4?
Okay, well, first I'll comment on yours. I think it's a great list. I am part of the naysayers when it comes to Seth Beer because of the utility, not because I don't think he can hit. That's where getting the universal DH might have actually hurt his value because he won't be forced to play in the field as much. Hopefully he gets first base, at which point it becomes, I think, a priority pickup. I love the Pena pickup. He came up as a high-rated prospect, but he was supposed to be kind of an all-glove, no-stick, and he's proven everybody wrong. I think he sticks around. Alec Baum, I think it helps that Bryson Stott has struggled a lot out of the gate because he was kind of the kind of sexy name in the pre-draft lists about somebody who could take his spot. So all in all, a really good list. I'm going to focus on pitchers since you did the hitters. So let me give you my top 4 pitchers going into this week. I think number 1 is former best pitching prospect who kind of fell off the pedestal and has reestablished himself is Mackenzie Gore. He pitched great last night. He's showing that I think he's figured out his mechanics, and we all knew the stuff would play once he figured it out. I don't see him leaving that San Diego rotation anytime soon, and he's only 56% owned, which is shocking considering last night he threw 5 shutout innings. Number 2, I'm going to go with Dylan Bundy. This guy's been around a while with the Orioles, with the Angels, and now with the Twins. Well, so far this season, 10 innings, 1 earned run, and he's got 8 strikeouts, 2 wins. Minnesota is a much improved team. This is a guy who, if you were paying attention many years ago when he was in the minor leagues, I think he started with over 30 straight scoreless innings in his career, and they were nicknaming him Mr. Perfect. Struggled a little bit when he came up. Maybe he's figured it out. His split finger is pretty good. Number 3 is somebody I know you like, Dan, and that's Tanner Rainey, the closer for Washington. Washington stinks. Don't get me wrong, but he's already got 3 saves in the first 2 weeks, and he's only, 56% owned. I'm not sure why that is, given the rarity of finding somebody who at least has a share of the closer's role. So he would be number 3. And number 4, bit of a stretch, is Jordan Hicks of the St. Louis Cardinals. He's going to get the start tomorrow. This guy is a flamethrower who struggled to stay healthy. He was a closer and reliever for most of his career up to this point. They're stretching him out to be a starter. I like the upside. At this point in the season, all pitchers are treated with kid gloves. Not many, except maybe the handful of elite, are going more than 5 or 6 innings. So he's on the same path as almost every other starter at this point, only with his elite stuff, you could get a bargain, and he is only 23% owned. So that would be my 4th pitcher that I would target at this point in the waiver wire.
All right, so those are some great picks. I particularly love what you said the last time, because when you bring somebody to our attention on the waiver wire who really other people aren't talking about, this is where we provide a lot of value. I mean, I do think Jeremy Pena is way under the radar on certain people's mindsets, but enough people know about him. When you mentioned a guy like Jordan Hicks, who was doing great at one point, was a high prospect, then looked like he was going to be a closer, but he's fallen off the radar almost entirely. Very few people are talking about him, so I appreciate you bringing him up. Let me just say, I did look at Jeremy Pena's stats, by the way. You said he all glove, no stick. But in AAA last year, in 133 at-bats, he had 10 home runs.
That's pretty good.
So that's pretty good. And he had 5 steals in that time, too. So he has huge upside. That's the reason I would say he's number 1. Now, speaking of, you were mentioning that a lot of pitchers are on a pitch count. I know you saw my rant the other day about Clayton Kershaw. He had a perfect game through 7 innings, and they pulled him.
Only through 80 pitches.
And that's the other thing, is his pitch count wasn't even that high. I can't believe they pulled him. I can't believe he let himself be pulled. But I wanted to mention one other thing. This is a prospect to look out for, not in 2022, but just on your radar. Do you know who I'm going to say? You know this guy, Corey Sasaki?
Oh, the kid from Japan.
Corey Sasaki in Japan threw a perfect game. And then the next time out, threw 8 innings of a perfect game right afterwards.
And they pulled him.
Because of pitch count. I guess I could see that, but come on. Let the guy go for back-to-back perfect games.
That would be impressive. Yeah.
But he's coming in with just this staggering record of number of batters retired in a row. I think he struck out 13 batters in a row at one point. It's just completely insane. So it's a name to file away. We're probably not going to see him anytime soon, unfortunately. All right, guys, let's jump in with other pickups. Now, remember, we mostly talked about young players there. This is a time in the season where veterans who are slumping, people are going to start to say, oh, these guys have fallen off a cliff. In fact, listen, I own Nelson Cruz. I think some people are wondering, has he fallen off a cliff? And by some people, I mean me. Now, I don't think he actually has. I don't think he's as good as he was. I still think he's going to provide a lot of value, but it sucks to have a guy like that in your utility spot who's also struggling. I hope he picks it up, especially because I have Seth Beer also, which makes absolutely no sense. But they're both really good players with some good upside. As soon as one of them starts hitting, or if Seth Beer gets first base eligibility, then I'm set. Let's go through the positions, Casey. At catcher, Who would you recommend 60% and under?
Well, I'm going to recommend two catchers. The first is Francisco Mejia of Tampa Bay. He's playing a majority of the games. Tampa Bay is notorious for shuffling people around. But, I mean, this guy's batting almost 350 and has 10 RBIs at this point in the season. Like those numbers aren't ones to sneeze at. And he came up. Was it with the Guardians that he came up?
Yeah, he was in the then Indians.
Right, and he was I mean, you want to talk about one of the biggest prospects, 5 years ago coming up for the then Indians. Like, he was considered at points untouchable or a can't miss prospect. So, and it's catchers are notoriously slower to adjust. And so maybe he's finally figured it out and put the pieces together. And you could be getting somebody that's pretty special.
Now, let me jump in on that, because a guy like Mejia can be incredibly valuable for more than one reason. If he emerges as a true catcher, and let's say you have a decent starting catcher, and you've been trying to get an outfielder, well, if you're sitting there with Wilson Contreras, as I am, and you pick up Francisco Mejia, and Mejia becomes a viable option, you can suddenly trade Contreras to a team that is just struggling at catcher and gives you a decent outfielder. So this is a way you can pick up great players, pick up value. It doesn't matter what position necessarily. Obviously, you want to prioritize the positions you need, but that's a way to think about it that can be very helpful. Meanwhile, is Francisco Mejia going to be in the lineup more and more? If you look at Mike Zunino's numbers, I would say yes. Mike Zunino is 1 for 25 so far. 1 for 25. He does have a double, but that's a fairly bad record right now. And listen, meanwhile, Mike Zunino usually bats like 199. So batting averages has just plummeted for a long time now. But I think Francisco Mejia he's my top pickup at catcher as well. Are there other guys you had in mind at catcher?
Well, the only other one is kind of a long shot if you have an NA position or room on your bench is Adley Rutschman, the minor leaguer, top prospect for the Baltimore Orioles. This is a guy who hits for power and average and always has. He doesn't strike out much. When he comes up, there's a pretty good chance he's going to be an above average catcher. And there's a pretty good chance it'll happen sometime this summer. And so, especially if you're in a keeper league or a dynasty league, I'm assuming he's already owned in dynasty leagues. But I would get him and stash him if I had the room on my bench, because that's somebody who's better than a trade if he gets called up in July near the trade deadline and you need an offensive boost. If he gets called up and you can put somebody like that into your catcher slot, that's more valuable than many players you could probably try to trade for at the same time.
Yeah, I wonder also, do you think they would play him at DH sometimes because he's got that good of a bat? It's really possible. So that makes him even more valuable. I also think, if you've got Salvador Perez, let's say, but you don't have a lot of good stuff on the waiver wire, pick up Adley Rutschman. When Adley Rutschman comes up, deal Salvador Perez. You can get a lot of value for him. That's sometimes the way you have to think about this. How are you going to get the value? Get more and more value on your team. I'm going to mention one other guy. I can't even believe I'm mentioning him. Gary Sanchez.
Oh.
Okay. Now, Gary Sanchez, remember, I said I thought he would hit like 150. And he still very easily could. But currently, he's hitting 216, and he's got 8 RBIs going so far. I'm just saying I'm not recommending him hugely, and he's 60% rostered, which is ridiculous. He should be about 25. But if you're in a pinch and you want to see if you can get somebody who's hot for a little while, you could do worse than him. I would not be comfortable with him as a long-term option, though. And I'd pick up somebody like Francisco Mejia way ahead of him, and certainly Adley Rutschman. All right, let's go to first base. Case. Who do you have in mind?
I have a couple. I'm a big fan of Rowdy Tellez in Milwaukee. He's in a good lineup. It's a great hitter's park. He's always been a sneaky producer, and so far this year he's got 8 RBIs. He's batting 270. He's hit 3 home runs. There's not a lot of competition for him at first base. Keston Hira will work in there sometimes. But then Tellez can DH. That's the beauty of the National League Universal DH. So he's one I have. And another guy is, and I mentioned the last week at the end, I kind of threw his name out there, was Ji-Man Choi in Tampa. I saw a stat the other day that he's in the top 5 in barrel percentage in the league right now, meaning he's making hard contact at a greater percent than 99% of the league. And so, he's currently ranked 46th. And he's only 32% owned. So that's another guy. If you're stuck with an Anthony Rizzo or somebody who's not consistently hitting well, like, this is a guy who can plug in and help you right away.
And, guys like Ji-Man Choi, they emerge regularly where, people say, well, he's 30 years old. He's been in the league for a while. Listen, he just may not have gotten that much of a chance, may not have caught fire, but these guys are super, super talented. I do think I would say he's my top first base pickup. You can make an argument for somebody who I'm going to mention at a different position because he has position eligibility at a better position for him. But when I look at it, I think that's the top first base pickup. I still like Nathaniel Lowe a lot. What I don't quite understand is why is he such a singles machine? He has 16 hits. He has 2 doubles and no home runs. He's a singles machine. But what I'm hoping is that the good contact is eventually going to even out. He's a young player. He was a pretty high prospect when he first came in. It is amazing how quickly the bloom comes off the rose for these prospects. Francisco Mejia is a great example of that. Nathaniel Lowe is another one. I think you can do a lot worse than starting Nathaniel Lowe at first base. I'm looking to see if there's anybody else I'd mention. I got to ask you, what do we make of Frank Schwindel? Yes, that's exactly the face that you should.
It's like sometimes you don't need words to describe it. I like that he qualifies. He's at first and third base, right?
No, only first.
Only first. Oh,
Patrick Wisdom is at first base and third base.
But
we'll mention him at third base because that's where that's
where his value is. He's streaky. If you catch him on a hot streak, he can carry you for, it seems like, games on end. I mean, look, I'm fortunate. My name is Vlad to the Bone because I have Vladimir Guerrero at first base. So whenever I look at a first baseman, I'm always like, that's not
Frank Schwindel, Vlad to the Bone.
But he is, I mean, what is he? I'd have to look up his numbers, but you can do worse.
He's 52% rostered. He's got 2 homers, 7 RBIs, batting .261. He's just uninspiring. I would rather. Yeah. Listen, sometimes boring gets it done, but I might rather take my chances. And let's move to second base with this because is it Jonathan Scoop or Shoop? I've never known because
it's actually Scope.
Scope. Wow. All right. Now this is interesting. Ross isn't even on the show and we mispronounced something. It's just what we do at MFFN.
His spirit is here with us.
Ross, that was for you.
That's right.
So it's Jonathan Scope. Really? Yeah. All right. So somebody needs a phonics lesson because he's not pronouncing his name the way it's spelled. But the guy's batting 119. Why am I recommending a guy who's batting 119? Well, he doesn't usually have the best batting average anyway, but he's got a lot of pop. He always has. What I don't love is now he's in Detroit. That makes it a little bit harder. Even so, if you're looking for a second base fill-in, I think you can do a lot worse than that. My top second base fill-in, though, is Jurickson Profar. Do you remember when Jurickson Profar was like the number 1 prospect in the league?
For 3 years in a row when he was in the Texas Rangers organization.
Yeah. And you got to pay attention to these guys who maybe are starting to figure it out 3 or 4 years in. It can happen. I mean, I imagine it's very, very hard to be a good major league player, and you got to learn that skill set and figure it all out. Well, Jurickson Profar, not only does he look like he's putting it together, but he qualifies at first base, second base, and outfield. And who knows where else he's going to play with Tatis out. So he's my number 1 pickup at second base. Do you agree with that, or you have somebody else?
No, I had him as my number 1. I had him probably as my number 1.
You mentioned him. Yeah.
Yeah. Because of the position versatility. Like, I like Pena, and I think he's going to be great. But just shortstop versus if I'm doing it in terms of value, I think having him available at 3 different positions increases his value some.
The only reason
go ahead.
Go ahead.
The
only reason I had Pena higher than him is just because he's younger with less track record, and that means possibly more upside. But Profar is a huge prospect himself. Go ahead.
Yeah, I worry a little bit about Pena as, I don't have the statistics to back this up, but I always see like these prospects come up, like Austin Riley a few years ago. Remember, he came up and he was like gangbusters with his power and his getting on base. Then he went for like 3 months where the pitchers figured out where the hole in his swing was and they exploited him, and he was striking out more than anybody. And then it took him another year and a half, and now he's one of the best hitters in the league. I'm not denying Pena is the better player in the long run right now than Profar.
Yeah, I get it.
But I worry about if the pitchers are going to figure something out about Pena and cause him to struggle. Whereas Profar's been in the league now for four or 5 years, and he's doing it when they have all the tape on him. So that was kind of my assessment there. The other guy I like is somebody on your roster in our keeper league is Thairo Estrada in San Francisco. He just keeps doing okay. He's not hitting for great average, 230 in his average, but he's got a couple steals. He's scoring a bunch of runs. He even knocked out a couple home runs, and this is not a power guy. And he qualifies at both middle infield positions as well as outfield. So again, that versatility is something I really like.
Yeah, I also think you see guys like this emerge and they start to play really well. I mean, the guy has never played more than 50 games in a season. You don't know what this guy can do. He batted .273 last year in 52 games. He had 7 homers, stole 1 base. I like to look at the walk and strikeout ratios. He was 9 walks to 23 strikeouts. I also think San Francisco, they just have a way of bringing out the best in a lot of players. Now, his average has dipped to 227 now, but it was up around like 260 like 3 days ago. You know, this early in the season, you can't worry about the numbers too much. You got to look at the trends. And I think he's a guy who looks like he is emerging as a nice player. Let's move to third base. Third base, to me, is the most shallow of the positions, but it may be that I am just stuck starting Eduardo Escobar, who, you know, you could do a lot worse than him, but you can also do a lot better.
Yeah, I remember I traded you for him last year.
Yep, it happens. I feel like it happens every year. One of us trades for him. All right, who do you got at third base?
Well, I had Alec Bohm as my top third base pickup, obviously. I agree with your assessment of him. I think he might have figured it out. He could have, he sort of is going that Austin Riley route, and hopefully he reaches the ceiling that Austin Riley is. I don't want to sit here and say I'm expecting him to, you know, be a top 10 fantasy or top 20 fantasy player. But he came into the league about a year and a half ago, or the end of the 2020 season, I believe. And he looked like he was on the fast track. Then the pitchers figured him out last year. He struggled a lot. And maybe he's starting to mature. So he was my top one. The second one is the guy I mentioned last week, because I do think he's going to get called up at some point, and that's Jose Miranda in Minnesota. This guy has hit everywhere he's hit. Some scouts put him as one of the top hitters in the minor leagues right now. Third base is currently manned by, I think it's Gio Urshela in Minnesota, although they could be putting Urshela at short some, but not with Correa there. And I don't think they see Urshela as a long-term answer or as somebody who they're going to use if they're competing and he's in the way of Jose Miranda. So you talked about Josh Jung, I think, last week too, who's a great prospect. Problem is he had that rotator cuff injury in the preseason. I don't know when he's going to be up. Miranda is healthy, and so that's why I would put him a little above Jung in the prospect race.
All right, and let me also mention, I mentioned Josh Jung last week because he happened to have DL eligibility. He was on.
Oh,
he was
that's
on the
right.
IR.
You did say that.
But guess what? They changed it. I picked him up, stashed him on my IR, and then they changed him to NA. And my roster was frozen, so I couldn't hold it. So, listen, that was Yahoo's fault. I made the recommendation. I called it as I saw it. I mentioned Nolan Gorman as a huge pickup at third base. I think pounce on him now. You do not have much time left. I know they're going to talk about service time, and he could be down there until the beginning of June, maybe, but I just don't see it happening. I think he's going to end up playing second base. I would say in the next 2 weeks is my guess. Pounce on it now. A couple other guys that I do like. These are kind of more fill-in types, but Joey Wendell has second base, third base, and shortstop eligibility. He's got a lot to like. He's a professional hitter. His average right now is 323. He does a little bit of everything. He's uninspiring, but at this point in the season, we're already starting to see guys getting dinged up and things like that. Two other guys I'd take a chance on at third base. Patrick Wisdom, I've never been that huge of a fan of because he was a late bloomer, didn't seem to be somebody who was really going to stick. But he's got 2 homers and 10 RBIs. And he's got position eligibility at first, third, and outfield. He's a pretty good player to have on your team. The other one that I probably would take a chance on, but this would be more of a short-term one to see if he can keep it up, is Michael Franco. He could be, maybe he's going the Jurickson profile route, and he's finally figured it out. He was a big-time prospect when he first came up, and he's killing the ball right now. So it's looking good. Check it out. Remember, the back end of your roster, you're probably going to need to turn over a lot until you find those spots that really work. Let's move to shortstop case. Who do you have on your mind? We've already mentioned Jeremy Pena, of course, so we won't talk about him. Estrada we covered as second base, shortstop, and outfield. Just mentioned Joey Wendell. Who else do you have?
I really like Jorge Mateo in Baltimore. This is another prospect that struggled when he first came up. He's not hitting for a great average. Well, he actually is. 270 isn't a bad average at all anymore. In fact, that would help
average now.
He's not a power guy. He's not going to hit home runs, but he's got 3 stolen bases. And stolen bases, as you mentioned at the top of the show, nobody steals bases anymore. So if you can get somebody who's stealing more than 1 or 2 a week, that can help you considerably. And he qualifies at second, short, and outfield. Again, both middle infield positions and the outfield. So that's my top shortstop pickup. I could have listed him under second baseman as well, I guess.
Okay, now this could be a controversial recommendation, but I think you'll agree with it in large measure. I still am very high on C.J. Abrams. I know he's hitting 133, but he's a very young hitter. He's going to figure it out. The question I think people have is he going to get sent down? That could happen. He's still going to come back up this year. I definitely, and not only that, but he's got a skill set that really translates to what we need. He steals lots of bases. Yeah, don't let go of C.J. Abrams. I know some people think O'Neal Cruz is the better way to go when it comes to a shortstop stash. Some people, I think, includes you, Casey. I at least you're the one.
I'd rather. I like both prospects. I like Abrams' upside just as much as Cruz, but Abrams is in the major league, so I would always go with the one who's available and playing.
Yep. Okay. But either one I think is a great addition to a team. Jorge Mateo was my top shortstop pickup other than Jeremy Pena. I really do like Estrada. It seems like he's going to keep that up. Wendell's useful. Some people are having questions about whether to hang on to Brendan Rodgers. I'd want to wait that out a little bit longer, the opportunities he has in Colorado. But I'll tell you, if he keeps hitting this badly for another week or two, it may be time to move on. All right, we're going to do outfield now. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, I had O'Neal Cruz on my list. I agree with you that C.J. Abrams is the better own right now. And the other one, although he's struggling, is Bryson Stott, the kid who was supposed to push Alec Boehm at third base in Philadelphia. He's hitting terrible right now. So don't take this as me saying this is the guy, he's going to do it. But if you, as you said, and it's important to note, the bottom 2 or 3 spots on your roster turn over all the time. You are going to ride the hot hand and sit people out. You're not going to dropping one of the bottom 2 on your roster rarely hurts you over the course of the season. So you can take chances on people. And Stott is going to get a chance. He's got speed. He hit like crazy in spring training. And so he's somebody else I would take a flyer on.
Okay. Let's move to outfielders. Obviously, there's a lot more outfielders than at the other positions. So there's a lot to choose from. Let's pick a couple that you think are, some of the best additions you could have.
Well, the guy, I mentioned him last week, and he hasn't done anything to disprove me, is Brandon Marsh in Anaheim. They cut Justin Upton because they wanted to make sure Brandon Marsh had an everyday job. He didn't. It's not like he came out of nowhere. This is a guy who's been in the top 10 prospects in their organization for years, was actually, I think, in the top 3 with Joe Adell the last couple years. And he's hitting .323. He's stolen a base. He's gotten a home run. He's knocked in 11 runs already this year. So he's getting the at-bats and he's producing. And quite honestly, he's ranked 47th right now overall in Yahoo on the season. You can do a lot worse.
Yeah. And meanwhile, Joe Adell is starting to struggle in certain ways. If he doesn't really turn it around, he could end up being platooning more, and Brandon Marsh has a lot more room. I think Brandon Marsh is a great pickup. There are certainly questions about this kind of pickup, but I actually really like a guy like Jock Peterson. Here's why. He's predictable. He hits righties. I said this about Brandon Belt in our week 1 waiver wire show. I think that a guy who's predictable in some way in terms of what he's going to produce, and obviously produces well, is a guy that I'd like to have on my team. Ross outbid me for Jock Peterson. He'd just been sitting out there on the wire. We're all maybe looking at him every once in a while. And finally, I was like, you know what? I'm ready to bring him on my team. Bid $1. Ross bid $3. So he's not that sick.
Big spender.
Well, out of 100, that's decent. I also still really like Josh Lowe. I know he hasn't been hitting that well yet, but again, young hitter, huge talent, 30-30 upside. You can't find a lot of that floating around. So I think he's a great pickup. AJ Pollock still at 59%. he should be rostered more. I know he's on the IL right now, and I know he'll be on the IL again. Don't come to me and say, oh, but he always gets injured. I know he always gets injured. He produces when he plays. So that's another one that I like. Give me a couple other names at outfield.
Well, I'll name one other, and he's struggling so far, hasn't really produced yet, but that's Andrew McCutchen. Hasn't hit a home run, I think, as of today when I checked, but he's actually stolen 2 bases, and this is a guy who has produced in the past. You know, we're banking on him regressing positive regression to what he can do. I still think he's upside of 20 to 25 home runs, scoring a bunch of runs. He gets on base a lot still, even when his average is low. So he's going to DH a lot, which should hopefully allow him to play in more games, because the older players, we worry about injuries. So I really do like him. And to get back to Josh Lowe, I'm a big fan of him too. I know he struggled, but Tampa traded Austin Meadows, 100-plus RBI guy, for a reason, because they wanted to give this guy a chance because they believe in him. I don't think the leash is that short. I think if you can put him on the end of your bench and wait for him to figure it out, you'll be really happy when you did.
All right, we're going to move to pitchers. I'm going to jump in first. You had mentioned Mackenzie Gore. He'd be my top pickup, hands down, for 60% and under. But another guy I like is a guy you mentioned last week, and he's a middle reliever. But Christian Javier is just putting up great numbers. Not only is he putting up great numbers, but he's a middle reliever on a team that's going to win a lot of games. So it's a great addition. He qualifies as starting pitcher and relief pitcher. And believe it or not, that can actually be really, really helpful. When you're trying to load up on relief pitchers and you need guys to start, Christian Javier is going to be a guy who's start worthy all the time. I also like Dylan Bundy. You mentioned him. Andrew Heaney popped up as a noteworthy pitcher, striking out, I think, 11 guys in one game. Now he's on the IL. So the question is,
I think I read that he got injured.
He did. But the word on the street is that Dave Roberts does not expect his shoulder injury to keep him out long term. That being said, Dave Roberts took out Clayton Kershaw after 7 innings of perfect innings.
And when you're talking about a pitcher and you mention the word shoulder, I think we all
that's worrisome.
Yeah, so I think those are great. The only I would add, Aaron Ashby got a start last week for the Milwaukee Brewers. He came up last year, and if you remember, his strikeout numbers were insane. This year, he's in 9 innings, 1 run, 9 strikeouts. So his whip isn't great right now. His control isn't as good as I would like it to see, but this is a guy who's done it in the past, and they're using him in that kind of Christian Javier role where he'll get the spot start, and if somebody gets injured, he'll get a spot in the rotation. And he's going to get those 5th, 6th, 7th innings because Josh Hader's going to get the 9th. Devin Williams is going to get the 8th. So he'll be in that position to get a lot of those kind of vultured wins as well. So he can help you there too. Another guy I like is Hunter Green gets all the publicity in Cincinnati as the hotshot rookie pitcher, and he deserves it. What did he have? More pitches, the most pitches ever in a single game, over 100 miles an hour. So the guy's easy cheese. You love to watch him pitch. But Nick Lodolo came up. His numbers aren't great right now, 9 innings, 8 earned runs, but he's got the stuff. He's struck out 12 through 9 innings. He's one, again, when I'm structuring my roster, I tend to have a lot more pitchers on my bench than I do hitters, because I like to have the selection of matchups, whether I want to play this person or I don't. And Nick Lodolo is one of those guys who, if I have the spot at the end of my bench, I'm going to put him on it, because if and when he figures it out, he can go from a matchup start to a must start pretty quickly. And those pitchers can prove really valuable down the stretch run. So that's another starter who I would target, who's only 23% owned and probably not really talked about in that respect.
Okay, now there's another prospect that I had in mind. Sometimes we're going to mention prospects, and pitching prospects, especially starting pitchers, they can come in and make a big difference right away. Max Meyer in Miami, he's looking lights out in the minors. I think we're going to see him this year. Just keep an eye on him. If you're not going to add him, get him on your watch list for sure, and just pay attention to what's happening. If he's showing real signs of life, you got to pick him up. Corey Kluber, go ahead.
I was going to say, Max Meyer is a great example of also look at the organization he's coming through. Miami has turned out, there's something in the water in their pitching and pitching development down there where they're just turning out fantasy relevant pitchers day after day after day. They have this young, like, great rotation, and everybody they bring up seems to immediately be a high strikeout, good ratios pitcher. So if Meyer's able to do it in that organization, I would trust it.
All right, I also just mentioned Corey Kluber. Corey Kluber is the A.J. Pollock of pitchers. Is he going to get injured? Yes. Is he going to perform while he's not injured? Yes. So I think A.J. Pollock is even better than Corey Kluber in terms of a solid bet to perform. But I think Corey Kluber is a good bet to perform for a while until something comes up. All right, let's move to relievers. We know that the closer situation is hell on earth. It just is. It's always rotating. You're never safe. It doesn't matter how much you invest in it. If anything, the more you invest in it, the worse it is. I made a joke the other day. Somebody was like, "Oh, you only have 2 closers." And I was like, yeah, as soon as I lose them, I won't have to worry about any. That's the thing about closers. They're always worrisome. But there are always guys sneaking under the radar. I'm going to mention one of them, Jorge Lopez on Baltimore. His numbers look great. He's basically running away with the role. Is he likely to be dealt at the trade deadline if they can find a good partner? Absolutely. But you get 4 months of decent closer material, and let's say he gets 25 saves to somebody else's 35. At that ratio, it's pretty small. Pick him up. He's great to have on your team. Who do you have at closer?
Well, I mentioned last week we talked about Tanner Rainey, and he continues to get saves in Washington. And I don't know, he's got a 0 ERA. His whip isn't great, so he hasn't been one of those ones where you watch him pitch and you feel safe the whole time. But he's got 3 saves. The other guy is an IL guy who, if you can get him, he's only 22% owned in that Miami system, is Dylan Floro. He's going to be in the mix for saves as soon as he comes back. And the rumor has it he'll be back in the next week or 2. If you can get him now, stash him in your IL spot. And then when he comes off, like, you've got a closer. I don't understand why he's only 22% owned when finding saves is so difficult.
So I have 2 other guys that strike me that way. Lucas Sims of Cincinnati. One of the reasons I don't like him as much as Floro is they have a less clear bullpen. I know we talked about Art Warren, but I think he is fading a little bit, it seems like, at the current moment. Could he be back? Yeah, he could be. But I think Lucas Sims is probably the best bet in that roster. I also think that Emilio Pagan in Minnesota, he got the last save, and he looks good, and he's been good in his career. So I would scoop him up right away. Only 10% rostered. So there's guys to get all the time, especially this early in the year. Scour the wire. Get the best value you can. If you can, make 2-for-1 trades that open up space for another roster spot. Now, of course, the more people talk about that in the fantasy community, the less likely you're going to be able to do it. But pounce on it if you can. Getting that roster spot and getting the best player is the way to go. Casey, anybody you would add before we wrap up for today?
In relievers, the only one I would consider is Michael Fulmer in Detroit. Soto is the closer of choice there, and he's clearly A.J. Hinch's number 1, but he hasn't let him close on back-to-back nights yet, and so Michael Fulmer has gotten the opportunity to get a save there. And he also has gotten a win in 5. He's 5 innings, 7 strikeouts, no ERA, only a .35 whip. So he's pitching in leverage situations, which will get him wins and saves, and so far he's been doing pretty well.
All right. Now, we've had a lot of people tuning into the waiver wire, which is great to see. Glad you guys are tuning in, but we're not getting a lot of comments just yet. So bring your comments. We want to talk to you about fantasy sports. We're way into it, especially baseball. Casey and I go crazy about baseball. So put your comments below. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and hit like if you like what you're hearing. We will be back here next week, the same time, Thursday, 4:45 p.m. Eastern, 1:45 p.m. Pacific. I imagine Ross the Boss will be back in action by then, so tune in to catch Ross the Boss, and we look forward to bringing the heat to you once again, and keep an eye out for our shorts where we release one major pickup that we each think you should be rushing on, so you don't have to just wait until Thursdays. We're going to bring you the information as much as we can. Thank you so much for watching, and tune in next week.
Kill Clip Octane. New flavor. Laser Lemon plus 125 milligrams of clean caffeine. No sugar.
25 milligrams of CBD.
Meow available at QClip.com.